Hey guys, I am Dani and this is Summer Skye Gardens. In case you're new here, I own a flower farm in Splendora, Texas, which is right northeast of Houston. We're zone 9B, and I am out at the farm today just working, harvesting, doing all the things. And I thought this would be a good opportunity for me to cut some of the spring flowers and kind of go through and show you guys what all I grew for spring, what worked well, what didn't work well, and how to really be successful growing cool flowers in a hot climate. So most of the flowers that I grew for spring, I have here to show you some examples. There are a handful that have already come and done. So I'll mention those and I'll see if I can throw up some pictures right here or video for you to see, but I just may not have some of those with me. As always, if you like this video and found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up, comment if you have any questions, share it with a friend. So all in all, probably my number one tip to be successful growing cool flowers in a hot climate is to plant in the fall. I do not plant anything to grow in the spring, in late winter or spring, like a lot of people do up north. It warms up too quickly here in the spring. I mean, today I think we have a high of 87. Who knows, soon we'll probably be getting up in the 90s once we hit May, and our spring can be a little bit shorter and it just warms up too quickly to really plant anything in late winter like January, February, March and get anything out of it. I also find that when you fall plant and everything gets that nice cool mild winter weather that we have, they just grow a lot better. They grow bigger and more bountiful. So all of my seed flowers that I grow as annuals from seed, I'm planting them outside really end of October and throughout November. And almost everything I start indoors. So that would be like 4 to 6 weeks before that. So kind of like September and October. But I'm getting those all in the ground because by November, it's starting to cool off. I mean, Halloween can still be hot for us, like in the upper 80s or 90s. But once we get into November, we're starting to drop, maybe see some 70s days, starting to cool off a little bit at night. And that lets everything be able to settle in for a good 4 to 6 weeks before our first frost, which is usually like mid-December, and it was this year. So think about in your climate, if you want a fall plant, get everything in the ground about 4 to 6 weeks before your first anticipated frost. So all the seed annuals go in end of October and into November, and I might do a couple of successions, but a lot of the spring stuff I don't, because like I said, it warms up too quickly that if I did several successions, the later ones really aren't going to have time to bloom. There's a few caveats to that, which I'll mention when I'm talking about the individual flowers. And then when it comes for the bulbs and the corms. So those, the Ranunculus and Anemones, I planted in November. I think I'm going to do it a little bit earlier this year. The Daffodils I planted in November. That was fine. My tulips, so I buy only pre-chilled tulips and I get those in December and plant those kind of right away, which I think works out really well. We have a very short tulip window here. And let's see. Probably the latest thing I'm planting is maybe a last succession of tulips and lilies, which usually lilies you think of as being like a summer flower, but for here it's really more of a spring flower, and I plant those in like January, and that's the latest. And you know, the thing is here too, like come January, I'm already starting seeds for my summer annuals to plant those out, you know, in March. This year, you know, we're supposed to have a last frost like end of February, but this year it froze in January and then it never frosted or froze again. So we've had a very nice, longer spring, you know, which has been great for all the spring flowers, but a lot of times it will heat up quicker. So that's kind of a general timeline of when I plant. And if you're in a hotter climate, I would, you know, really encourage you to do more or all of your planting in the fall and let everything enjoy like your nice mild winter. And if, you know, if you need to cover things, then cover them, and it shouldn't be that much or that often. I mean, I think I covered everything for the freeze in January. And that was one time for a few days. And then I took everything off and we were fine. I didn't cover anything for our frost because I grow things that can handle frost in our climate. And so, you know, growing things throughout the winter with our mild winter, it was easy. You know, I'm not having to like put frost cloth on, take it off, yada, yada, yada. I just did it one time. So, you know, I feel like that's definitely worth it. All right, so let me go through my list of flowers that I grew. And like I said, if I have it right here, I'll show it to you. I'll give you some tips on how to grow them. If I don't have it here, I'll try to put up like some pictures or video. The first one is Minette. And my Minette is pretty much done. It's gone to seed. I do have a few blooms, which I will show you right here. Typically, when this first starts blooming, all of this will be these pretty little white flowers. But like I said, it's gone to seed. It's come and done, but it's a really pretty like textural flower. I call it like a little wildflower. I grew this because I saw Aaron with Floret flower growing it a few years ago, and I've grown it a few years, and it's super pretty. It adds a little fun textural element. The florist liked it. My customers liked it. Super easy to grow. I didn't have to cover this one. Some of the flowers I grow, you don't have to cover if you get like a mild freeze. So definitely going to grow a lot more of this next year. And it dries really well. And even if you do have the seed pods, I mean, it's still a fun textural element and it'll last fine in a bouquet. So I highly recommend this one if you haven't tried it before. And the bees love it. So if you're looking for something to support your pollinators, Minette is an excellent choice. All right, the next thing I grew were poppies. And this year I just did rattle poppies. Now, in the past, when I've grown poppies, I've always tried to direct sow because that's what everyone says to do. They don't do good with transplanting, and I've never had great success doing that. So I decided this year I wanted to try these rattle poppies and start them indoors, and I had pretty good success on that. And I didn't grow any others this year because I really just ran out of time, but this is one of the flowers. Let me hold it up a little closer. So they can be like this pinky color or more whitish with the purple. Super, super pretty, big blooms. The negative with the poppy blooms is that they only last for a couple of days. So this one actually just opened this morning. So it'll look beautiful today and then tomorrow. And then by, you know, Saturday, it's probably going to lose all its petals. So I didn't grow these for the flowers. I grew them for these seed pods, which after the petals fall out, these seed pods, you can see right here, get really big and thick, and you can cut them off and dry them or use them fresh as like a fun little textural element in your bouquet. So these were super easy to grow. Once again, I did not cover these because poppies can handle freezing temperatures, and they got to be like 3 to 4 feet high. I'll see at the end of this video, I'll go show you guys some footage from out in the field, but super high, super prolific. I'm definitely going to grow a ton more of these next year. Let's see. Okay, statice. So love statice. I've grown it for years. Excellent cut flower, excellent dried flower. I grew about half a bed of statice, and I had a mix of, let me pull one out here. This purple color, which anytime you see flowers that they say dark blue, it's always purple. I don't know why they don't just call it purple. So really, really pretty color. And this color is kind of hard to find sometimes with flowers, so it's fun to grow it when you can. So I had this like dark blue purple color, this pinky color. Let me pull this out. This is really pretty for spring. And statice just makes a really excellent like filler flower. It really adds, you know, texture to a bouquet. And like I said, it dries wonderfully. And then of course I grew yellow, which is beautiful and always a great accent. Yellow goes good with anything. But yeah, half a bed was plenty. I have more than I need, but a lot of it, I'm letting it just sit. The butterflies are all over it. So another excellent pollinator flower. And then here soon, I did 2 successions. So the second succession is growing and fixing to start blooming. And so I'm going in, and the first succession, I'm kind of cutting everything down to dry because I'll use these for all sorts of crafts and dried flower, projects. So whatever, that's the good thing with some flowers that dry well is that if you don't end up using them, you can just dry them. All right, the next thing, let's talk about our Snapdragons, which are a must grow for everybody for the spring. This year, I've grown them for years. This year, I only did Madam Butterfly because the Madam Butterflies have more of like a frilly flower, and I wanted to try some different colors. I love them. They're gorgeous. They grew really well. One note about Snapdragons is they come in different groups, and the different groups will bloom based off like the day length and the temperature. So one thing I'm going to do this year, and I would advise you to do in a warmer climate, is plant several different groups all at the same time in the fall, and they will naturally succession for you through the spring and into the summer, because some of them like shorter days, cooler temperatures. Some of them don't mind the heat and bloom with longer days. So if you do them all at once and then just let them bloom out, then that'll kind of give you several successions. So let me pull out. So these are the Ivory Madam Butterfly. These are a little short because these are the side stems. I've already cut a lot of the main stems, and that's what you'll see with Snapdragons is the main stems are thicker and taller, and then the side shoots are a little smaller, but definitely still beautiful and usable. And then here is the bronze with white, which I thought was just a really pretty peachy color for spring. This is my favorite color flower of any colors, is this like peachy color. I just love it so much. It's so springy. I also grew bronze. I have red and pink. Those are just now starting to bloom. So I don't have an example, but they've all done well. They've all been beautiful. So highly, highly recommend Snapdragons. Plant them in the fall, different groups. Can't go wrong. All right, the next thing, let's talk about straw flower. And I have some here that I pulled out of the cooler. And let me see if I can go get one. Hold that thought. All right, never mind. I was trying to go cut one in the field that had opened, but because it's still a little cooler and it's early in the day, they close. Interesting thing about straw flowers is if it's cooler, not as sunny, they kind of close up. In the cooler, they close up. And then once it warms up, gets sunny, then they will open. But love straw flower. Highly recommend. It's such a fun, funky flower. So here's what they look like closed up. And you can see like the flowers, they feel like straw or paper. See if I can put it by the microphone. Some ASMR for you. I grew several different mixes, so I have all these different colors, which is so fun. I love these for just bouquets, but even better when you dry them, they dry exactly how they look on the stem. So once they open up, cut them off, let them dry, and they're perfect for any sort of like dried flower craft, especially in the fall. I like to make flower pumpkins. I did that the last couple of years, and they were super, super popular with people. And these are like the perfect flower to put on pumpkins. So fall planted, super tall, very prolific. The germination was a little spotty starting them in trays, so I'm definitely going to do more next year. But, once again, if I can't use these fresh, you dry them. Always a good choice. Now, real quick, I'll mention a few things that I fall planted that are not really considered spring flowers and have not started blooming yet. So that's my Lysianthus. I planted this last crop that's fixing to bloom. I planted in January. I bought plugs, so highly recommend that. I planted Feverfew, which takes a long time to grow. It's just now starting to put up some shoots to bloom. So that's more of like a late spring, summer flower. What else? I think those are probably the main ones that I fall planted that haven't started blooming yet. Yeah, I think that's it. So moving on to Bupleurum. Now, I love Bupleurum, as most people do. Super pretty. So it's like a greenery, and it has these really pretty little yellow flowers. It also makes a great dried flower. I don't know that I'm going to grow this next year. And the problem is that Bupleurum, really you need to direct seed. And my germination was terrible. I think probably 10 to 20% actually grew into usable stems. Now, the ones that did, great, and I'm going to use them. But I had like half of a bed that was virtually empty because these did not germinate and grow well. So I'm tempted to try just a small section again. Or see if I can start them inside. I've tried that before and was not successful, but all in all, probably not going to grow these again. So if you can get them to germinate, great, but sometimes you just have to cut stuff that's too fussy or difficult. The next greenery that did really well that I highly recommend is Bells of Ireland. So it's also like a greenery. This is how it looks cut fresh off the stem. The center stems are definitely the tallest, and then you get all of these side branches. So super prolific, a lot of stems from it. It has a very, like, I tell people, like a lemony citrus smell. I think it smells really nice. And it just adds this really pretty chartreuse color. You can dry it. It looks a little funky dried, so it's not my favorite. It comes with these little leaves, and it's traditional to take these off when you use it. Definitely if you sell to florists, take them off and present it like this. But I think it's fine to use it with the little leaves. I think it's cute, you know, for your arrangements or like your bouquet subscriptions, you know. In my opinion, either way you want to go, but definitely wholesale or to florists, cut the leaves off. I like this too because once it grows, it can really sit on the plant for a long time, like for weeks. You know, I have some that they've been there for, I don't know, over a month, and I'm still cutting on them. The only bad thing is they start to put out these little like thorns underneath the bells that can be, you know, a little pokey and hurtful. So just be careful when you're handling it, but highly recommend. I did one succession in the fall, and I have so much. I did half a 50-foot bed, way more than I'm going to use, but highly recommend growing this one. It grew awesome for me in my warm climate. All right, the next thing is stock, which is like maybe my favorite or one of my favorite spring flowers. Let me get a few different colors. I love stock. I will say field grown don't get quite as tall as you might get in a tunnel, but I don't have a tunnel. I have no plans to get a tunnel. It's too hot here. I don't think I would get enough use out of it. Here are some different colors that I grew. I grew a bunch of different colors. So you can see beautiful, beautiful smells, like this beautiful spicy scent. All kinds of colors. This was probably my favorite, of course. This is Quartet Rainbow, and you can see it has this ombre effect, and it does get some branching. I thought it would branch from the bottom, but it branched higher up. So it was cool. The ones that did branch, you had like several flower clusters around it. But even the ones like this one that didn't branch very well, still beautiful. But I love stock. It's easy to grow. It's easy to start by seed. I would recommend doing several successions of this. That's what I did. So I've been cutting on this for a few weeks now, and I still have a lot more that's growing and ready to bloom. But this is absolutely a must grow for the spring. It's so pretty and it smells wonderful. Okay, the next thing is cress, which is a greenery. This is emerald beads, which is one of my favorites. So it has like these here's one stem. This is a smaller stem. You can get like huge stems, but you can see like it has these little greenery pods It will eventually put up flowers when it goes to seed and starts dying back. It'll put up flowers at the top, but you cut it like this when it's just, you know, fully built up and green. You can dry this really well, but I like using this because I feel like, you know, especially in a wrapped bouquet, it's a good like base to put your flowers around, and it gives a fun little airy textural element. It's super easy to grow, super prolific. I grew probably a third of a bed, and I haven't even used like a fourth of it. So you don't need a lot of plants for this. Next year, I'll probably grow like, I don't know, a fourth of a bed, maybe a half. It just kind of depends. Look at my crop plan, but I have way more crust than I actually ended up using, but very easy to grow. There's several different varieties, but I like this one the best. I have found this to grow the best for me. So definitely add crust on your list. All right, the next thing that I fall planted was Yaro, which Yaro can be, depending on your weather and where you are, it can be a spring or a summer flower. A lot of people, it blooms in the summer. For us, of course, it's going to bloom earlier in the spring. I planted 3 varieties. The native yellow variety hasn't started blooming yet. Probably will when it warms up more. I planted summer berries, which is supposed to be a mix of pinks. I got all white. So I don't know if this was labeled wrong or this is just how it ended up growing for me. But, you know, very pretty, very fun textural element, dries great. Next year, I'm going to be a little more sure about the colors that I grow because I really wanted some pinks, but I've been using the white. White goes with everything. And then I grew a pearl variety, which is just now starting to bloom, so I don't have one to show you. But the good thing with Yaro, where we live here in the hot south, is it is a perennial. So once it's done blooming, you can just leave it alone, let it die back, and then it will regrow next year and get even bushier. So you can definitely let it sit and grow for several years. So it's a really good investment to get some started if you live in a hot climate. Another thing that I fall planted, I forgot to mention earlier, that's just now growing really well is mountain mint. It's a perennial for us. I haven't cut on it yet because I'm waiting to see if it's going to bloom. I've only ever grown it before for the greenery, but it should put out some blooms, so I'm kind of letting it go. But it's beautiful. I fall planted it. It's done really well, and it will perennialize. So it'll probably die back in the summer once it gets super hot, and then start regrowing next year. All right, 4 flowers that have pretty much all done. First thing were my tulips. So I bought pre-chilled bulbs, which I highly recommend if you live in a hotter climate. Buy pre-chilled, or you have to stick your bulbs in the refrigerator for at least like 12 to 14 weeks. So if you buy pre-chilled, the supplier does that for you. So by the time they get shipped to you, you should have enough cold treatment where you can then directly plant them. That's what I do. But if you get bulbs that are not pre-chilled, you've got to put them in the refrigerator for a long time because we do not get cold enough winters for tulips to do well otherwise. So I highly recommend buying pre-chilled. I buy mine from Leo Burby. If you haven't put in your order yet for next year, do it right now because places will sell out of varieties once everybody gets going with their orders. But I get them in December, and then you can succession plant them. You can keep them in your cooler, your refrigerator to succession plant. This year I planted them slightly too late, and they all started to bloom the week after Valentine's, which sucked. I really wanted them for Valentine's and I just missed it. So this year I'm going to make sure I get them planted like a couple of weeks earlier. I will say that overall my tulips did really well, but definitely were better like the ones that bloomed earlier. And I think that's just getting that colder weather. So in my opinion, we really only have like a 3 to 4 week window where we can get a really good crop of tulips, and then it's already getting too warm. So I think if you can plant your bulbs to bloom in February, that's awesome. Once you start getting to March, it's already getting too warm. So you know, are tulips a worthwhile investment? They can be. You can dial it in. I planted mine in crates, which were like super low labor, super easy to pull out. Highly recommend growing in crates. But if you can dial it in, great. But if you can't, like just nix tulips. They're hard to grow here in the South. And it just may be too much effort for you. So it's something you'll have to decide for yourself. All right, another flower was Ranunculus. I do have like one last stem here. I'll show you. I grew several varieties. This was my first year actually having success with getting blooms. The bad thing is that, you know, the stems were long, but they were kind of spindly and the flowers were really little. So this is just a red one from a mix. I mean, it's really pretty and I definitely use them, but they were an accent flower. They weren't a focal because they were just too small and I couldn't sell any to the florist. So that was a bummer. And I think that might be either, you know, the heat, which you probably got to put shade cloth on them if you live in the South, or the corms were too small. So this year, what I'm going to do with my ranunculus is I'm going to make sure I buy varieties. I'm buying amandine, which is more tolerant of heat, and they should get nice and tall and big. I'm buying a smaller amount, but the biggest corms possible, because the bigger corms should put out more blooms and bigger blooms. And then I'm going to make sure I plant them a little earlier and put up shade cloth really like from the get-go to keep them nice and cool and see if they do better next year. But if they don't do better next year to become a focal flower, they're going to get axed because they're expensive and you kind of have to baby them a little. And so if I cannot get some bigger blooms to make it worth my while, then I'm just not going to grow them anymore. The next thing I grew were anemones. They are long done. I've grown anemones for years. They always do really well for me. I will say this year, I don't think I made good choices with the varieties as far as like height goes. So I had a ton of shorties that I was not able to use. They did bloom really well and, you know, big, beautiful blooms, but I think you have to be careful on the varieties you choose because there's so many different types, so many different colors. So next year I will be growing a lot of anemones yet again, but definitely, you know, certain varieties, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but just look them up, the different ones, how tall they get, how big they bloom, and the colors. But I find anemones to be one of the easier spring focals to grow in a hot environment, and they're really pretty. All right, the next thing that I grew for the spring were daffodils, and I've grown just basic daffodils in my landscape before, but this year I wanted to choose a lot of the really frilly double varieties for cut flowers. And the good thing with daffodils is they will perennialize. So, you know, it's a bigger investment up front. It's usually about $1 per corm, but you get them planted, they bloom, and then they stop, they kind of die back, and you just leave them alone. And the next year they will bloom again. So it's more of an upfront cost, but you should get several years out of them. The ones I grew were beautiful. I grew Tahiti and Replete, which were like really frilly, like double varieties. So many people had never seen them before. The Tahiti smelled especially nice. And then I grew like a double mix and a smaller mix. So they were wonderful. They grew super easily. They bloomed very early. So kind of right after the tulips were the daffodils. The only bad thing with daffodils is they secrete, when you cut them from the bottom of the stem, it secretes a sap that can hurt other flowers if you just dump them into water altogether. So you have to let them sit and condition by themselves for 1 to 2 hours to let all that sap come out. And then you can put them with other flowers. And I thought they looked beautiful with tulips, and, you know, some of the earlier spring annuals were just so pretty, you know, sticking those daffodils in there, and it gave it like a nice smell. So I think for this next year, I'm not going to buy any additional bulbs. I mean, obviously I'm going to let the ones I have grow and, you know, see how they do next year. And then maybe next year I'll decide to add some, but this year I feel like I have enough. I'm just going to kind of leave them and not invest it anymore right now. All right, the last thing I'll talk about, which I grew for the spring, were my lilies. And here is one variety. This is Purple Dream, which is actually like a really pretty pink color. The only lilies I grow are Asiatic lilies. For 2 reasons. Number one, they don't smell. So I feel like a lot of people like that because sometimes lilies that do smell can have a really strong fragrance that makes people just sick to their stomach. So Asiatics don't smell. And I've had really good success with them. So I feel like if I'm going to invest in growing lilies, I would grow Asiatics. They're very easy to grow. I grew them both in the ground and in crates. They both did well. I will say the bummer, even though they're beautiful, they grew well, they're an excellent focal flower, nobody wanted them. I did put them in my mixed like bouquets, or if I've done arrangements for people the last couple of months, I've put them in there. But I actually had a couple of people on my bouquet subscriptions request no lilies. Not really sure why. And then the florists never wanted them, which is such a bummer because I think they're gorgeous and, you know, so useful and very, you know, springy looking. But I'm trying to decide. I'm either not going to grow them at all next year, or I'm going to grow a very small quantity just for me to use in like mixed arrangements. Because the good thing with these is they bloom right when like your earlier spring, you know, main flowers are petering out. So like, you know, the tulips, ranunculus, anemones, once those are really starting to slow down, you have your lilies. So these can be like a really great focal flower before like your summer annuals, like your zinnias and your sunflowers are starting up. But just the fact that it was really hard to sell these, just, it was such a bummer to me. And this was probably my biggest loss on the amount of money I spent on the bulbs and the, you know, dirt and the labor and everything. This was my biggest loss, unfortunately. So like I said, next year I might just pick one variety and plant like, I don't know, 100 bulbs or something, or I may just nix them all together, because why grow something if you can't sell it or do anything with it? All right, guys, so I am done talking. Let me go shoot some video out here in the field just to show you kind of an overview on how things look, show you a little bit up and close video here. But thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions on any of these flowers or questions in general about growing in a hot climate, that's really what I'm trying to focus a lot of my content on, because I feel like there's not enough people out there that grow in the South that really talk about how to do it, because things can get very particular in our climate. You know, hit me up, drop a comment, shoot me a message. I hope you subscribe if you found this enjoyable, and I will see you guys in my next video.